Hello. So I'm Bekki Leaver. I'm a design researcher at the BBC. I work in a team called Systems and Service Design within Design and Engineering. So we are interested in the sorry, that just went black for a second. We are interested in the internal employee experience. And I, for the past year, have been working with radio and audio production. So today I'm going to talk to you about UI, UX, and UCD, what these things are, what they mean, what they don't mean. I'm going to give you some UI hints and tips. Then I'm going to give you some direction on how you can start using a UCD or user-centered design approach to design better things right now. And then finally, I will give you a brief story of when a UX team invaded a radio studio design project. So first and foremost, UI does not equal UX. In a lot of places, particularly when they are just getting into a UX sort of environment, they may use them interchangeably, but that is absolutely not right. So a UI is your user interface, and this is the access points that people use to interact with your thing. UX, on the other hand, is the experience this person has whilst interacting with it. So that's whether it's easy to use, whether it's learnable, what their motivations are, whether they can do what they need to do in an appropriate way. And UX is an umbrella term. So within the discipline of UX, you can see we've got interaction design. So that's the bit where you get your interface design, and it's all about usability and, in fact, sound design as well is up there. And we've got information architecture, which is about how we structure the information for retrieval later on. And UX is the big surrounding thing. So I am not a UI designer, but having spent 7 years as a web developer and 4 years as a UX researcher, I picked up some hints and tips. And the first one is to understand your users. You will hear me say this multiple times today. The best thing you can do to do good design is talk to your users. If your users are working in a low-light environment, you need to know. You need to know that your contrast needs to be higher. You need to know that you need brighter lights. If they tend not to look at the device that they're using after they get used to it, you need to know to give them some other sort of feedback, whether that's haptic or on another screen. But you need to talk to your users. Secondly, use visual hierarchy. So in my web developer days, I did a lot of email marketing. And I remember one particular situation where somebody asked me to code an email for them. And then they wanted something highlighted in bold, and then they wanted something else highlighted in bold. And then by the end of it, the entire email was bold and nothing stood out. So use visual hierarchy, use titles, use headlines, put things in the right order for the way you want people to see them. Which leads on to making the important things fast to find. In any system, in any situation, 20% of what you have available is going to be used 80% of the time. So if you've got actions that people are doing over and over and over again that you found out because you've spoken to your users, make them a priority, put them in key places. And then be consistent. So if you're using styles across a website or a piece of software or in your hardware, then use the same colors and textures and themes all the way through. And finally, test your ideas. Now, I've no doubt that some of you in this room have created prototypes. This is exactly the same thing, but you're prototyping an interface to be able to test that with your users, who you've already spoken to. So, how can you start designing better things right now using a UCD or user-centered design approach? Number one, understand your users. So we do a lot of, as a design researcher, we do lots of interviews. We will sit with people, we will talk to them about how they use things. We will get involved and we'll sit in where they're making things. We will interfere, we will not interfere. But the best thing you can do is talk to your users and ask them things like, what makes your job difficult? Not what do you want? Because infamously, people are terrible at knowing what they need, but very good at telling you what they want. Famously, Ford was claims to have said, if he asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses rather than cars, because users don't know what technology is available. So you need to find out what their problems are so you can design the solution. Second up, have some goals for both your user and your business. Now, I'm a design researcher, so I'm not that bothered about your business goals, but I'm sure you've all got a project manager or a product manager that's got KPIs or OKRs that they can throw at you for that. When it comes to user goals, we use some methodologies to do this. So we might create user stories. They are a format of summarizing your research that you got from talking to your users as a statement. So as an example, as a presenter here at Radio TechCon, I want to educate and entertain you so that Anne invites me back next year. Job stories are another version of this. They give you a little bit more context, so you can add a situation or some extra information to that. And finally, we sometimes use critical task analysis, which is when you're thinking about more than one person, which in a studio or in broadcasting you are likely to do. But I will come back to that one when I do a quick run through of how you can apply this in real life. So, number 3, try out multiple ideas. It can be really easy to think you've come up with the best idea first, but that's probably not going to be the case. So, we recommend you do some ideation. We personally like to use Playful Eights, which is a pretty simple workshop where you get a piece of A3 paper, fold it into 8 segments, and then you have 8 minutes to design a new idea in each box. This is an example of some work I've been doing at university with some other students. So we take photos of all of our designs, and then we get to vote on the ones that we think we like best, and then we can refer back to our goals to see how well they apply, and then we can take the next ones on and evaluate or test. Now, you may be thinking that to evaluate things is quite an expensive thing. You've got to build the thing, you've got to develop all your ideas, but you can test things using the most basic things possible. So paper and cardboard and sticky tape and colored labels. So break all that out, make a test. And to show you how this all works together, I'm going to talk you through what I've recently been working on at the BBC, which is when our UX team invaded a radio studio. Now, our brief was to do with the furnishings, so that's table layouts and the structure of the control room or cubicle for the BBC colleagues in the room. So this is my team. We are all UX designers or researchers, and we're all getting very excited over the new SSL desks that are going to the studios. We started this process by getting to know our users. We ran a series of workshops, and now I said, don't ask what they want, but sometimes you have to engage with them. So we gave them some fuzzy felt, and we went, design your perfect studio. And then we asked them why. Why did they want things in particular places? I followed these up by talking to 15 people individually, one-on-one, to find out how they worked, to find out what motivates them, what stops them from doing their best work, how we can make sure that the studio is designed to fit what they do. We also observed them, so I sat in on a couple of programs to watch actually how they interacted and how they moved around the space. So this is very sort of human factors and ergonomics, but taken from a UX perspective. From that research, we put together some critical tasks, which I mentioned earlier. Now, these are basically sort of theatre directions. Imagine you're in a play. You've got a series of actors in our roles. We've got the scenario that they need to complete, and we've got the setup, so how we're going to set up that environment. And we did about 60. We had 16 of these prepared for testing. And we tested them in a cardboard studio. It took my team less than a day and a half to put this together, and the cost is minimal. We've got cardboard boxes, we've got chairs, we've got some screens that they use for yoga classes to represent sort of the boundaries of the room, because we're interested in how comfortable people would feel in this environment. And then we invited people to come and test it. So we got a number of people in. We got broadcast engineers, we got producers, we got sound engineers, we got people that walking past. We had commissioners. Everybody and anybody that wanted to come and play could come and play in our cardboard studio. And then we got to try out our critical scenarios. So we could position things where we needed to. We could have obstacles in people's ways. So the previous slide said that you need to get out of the control room to change a cable and then get back in with potentially 8 people in this space. Sometimes you do need something a little bit more hi-fi. And with that, we created a VR version to test our lines of sight. Now, if anybody's got a QR code reader on their phone, please feel free to scan that and have a look at the VR version of ATA at the BBC in VR. So I've realised that I'm running really fast, apologies. So whilst you're all having a go at that, I'll quickly summarise what we were doing, where this project's at. So we had multiple people come and explore our cardboard studio. We had them use this VR headset to have a look at lines of sight. We collected all this feedback and we ran a session with some key stakeholders so that we could decide on the design of the studio. That then went off to the systems integrator to build in MDF so that they could test it even further with equipment setup, because I'm sure you saw that cardboard would not support a monitor, which I've just seen has actually just been done, so I'm quite excited to go and see that in MDF. So there will be testing more with users to see where things should be positioned. So, in summary today, if there's 3 things I hope you've taken away from this talk, it's 1, talk to people. Just get out there and talk to your users. They're not going to bite. They're normally nice people. Secondly, fail fast. So make your prototypes, iterate, get things in front of people quickly, and then make them better. And thirdly, have fun. Thanks very much.
Unfortunately, we've time for questions, so don't you go anywhere, Bekki Leaver. Well, one thing for me quickly, while you think of your question, to what extent is history an impediment? Because when you are changing things, we tend to base it on what we've experienced before, don't we? It's like, we still talk about audio carts, even though we're not pressing carts anymore. Is that, to a certain extent, you've got to do it to help people through the journey, but does it hold up the great new thing that you might do?
Sometimes, yeah. There were certainly situations doing that studio refurbishment project where, because it's always been that way, it should stay that way. But the whole point of talking to users and prototyping things is you can take them away from their mental models. You can give them new experiences, and they're far more likely to allow you to take them on a new journey.
Excellent. Right, first question. One over there. If we can, where's the block gone? Can we throw the first dynamic use of the block? It needs to go over there. There, just there. There we are. Way! Teamwork.
Rebecca, how do you deal with the political side and all the different stakeholders? I recall on one particular studio install I did, we got up to version H of the furniture, which was built in MDF and knocked together, pretty much like your 3D space, and we still had various political shenanigans going on. And when we finally got the studio built, it was a TV studio, actually, as a gallery I was building. The director came in and said, and that's the vision mixer, which we won't be using.
I can absolutely see your point. There's always going to be politics in any sort of decision where you've got multiple people involved. We like to have some key stakeholders from every environment that might be working with us. And we essentially create a decision board. So whilst I collect all the evidence and I can present that back, I'm not actually the person working in that environment. So it is down to the people who will be to make that call. And because it is ground up, the decision tends to come from the users, which helps you a little bit in convincing anybody higher up that you've done the wrong thing, because you have that evidence to say that this is how people work.
Next question.
Baseball,
down there.
Basketball. You talked a lot about how things look, but obviously radio is a very auditory kind of medium by its very nature. What role does how it sounds play in that kind of design process?
So there are a couple of ways to look at this. So we've done a lot of work with neurodivergency and how sound can impact workplaces in that respect. But there is also work going on in more the games industry than perhaps studio design at the moment about the differences material can have, and that can all be created in VR. And UX can go into sort of the sound design area, but at the moment that's not something that we do ourselves, and we've got a number of highly qualified engineers at the BBC that can do that for me.
Without going into feng shui, where should the doors be?
That tends to be wherever workplace says.
Because as a presenter, where people are coming in really does, if they come in behind you, which they do in many studios, it's really annoying, and they go, oh, and you go, ah!
Well, what we could do is set up some situations where I can talk to some users, and then I can give you your answer.
Thank you. Right, one final question. There we are, over there, thank you.
There are many established design patterns when it comes to building a studio. I'm interested, what changed as a result of the process you went through?
That's a really interesting question. So we got brought into this as a pair of, multiple pairs of fresh eyes, and to look at the problem from a different perspective. So besides seeing how the studio was currently laid out, we didn't really have any of that historical knowledge. And I think that was actually a benefit to us as a team, so that we weren't bogged down with how things had already been done. But with the decision-making board that we created, we had some long-serving people on there. So they could always bring that sort of influence in if it was necessary. But going through the journey with us of understanding what people were doing seemed to convince them that they weren't too bothered about how things had already been done, and were far more interested in new ways of doing things.
And one final one from me. What about when it's in there? Because it's only when it's in there in practice, isn't it, that you really know that something's not quite working. And there's a period of adjustment, but then there's probably a period when actually feedback is generally useful, I imagine.
Yeah, so with something like a studio or a physical piece of equipment, you do sort of have a bit of a cut-off line of when you can stop making big changes. And that's why it's so important to test early on. So the more you test with more disposable prototypes, the easier it is to not have those problems later. And as with anything, getting continuous feedback from the people that use it is always going to be valuable. Whether you can change things to a great degree or not is going to depend on the environment. But it is sort of having that continuous communication with users being the key thing in UX.
Bekki, thank you. Bekki Leaver.
Thank you.